Years ago, I used to have a daydream where the lights go down in a packed theatre and my name's announced and I walk out on stage to do a one-man stand-up comedy show. There's massive applause. I get to the microphone and that was it. That was the daydream because I'd not thought of anything to say. It was just a daydream about doing something a bit rock and roll with my life. I was in my late 20s and I worked in an office. Didn't want to be the centre of attention. Only had a passing interest in comedy, really. And yet that was my daydream. And years later, I somehow became a professional stand-up comedian, despite being me. If I think of my life as a story with a soundtrack, then the soundtrack would be this poem, The Love Song of J. Prufrock. It's one I read at school when I was 16. And it sums up beautifully what it's like to be shy and awkward and lonely in the way that so many 16-year-olds feel. And you feel that no one else could possibly understand. But the man who wrote this seemed to understand. And when I first went to the Edinburgh Festival to see some shows, and that theatre daydream sort of started to kick in, I wondered if there was some way I could bring this poem to the stage. That was in 1991. I shall be discussing my work rate later, if I get round to it. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Do not ask what is it. Let us go and make our visit. Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, written in 1910, thereabouts, by T.S. Eliot, about a shy, sensitive man. Studied at school in 1980 by Dave Williams, a shy... All right. A shy, spotty boy. And talked about now by the same Dave Williams, an obscure, solvent comedian. Just show of hands, who's actually read The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock? Has anyone read the poem? A couple of people. Who's heard of it but not read it? Because I always think more people have heard of something than read. I've never read War and Peace, shamefully, but obviously I've heard of it. I've never been to an orgy, but it's the same principle, though a different show. What I'm doing, I'm hoping you'll go away, and a lot of people came up to me in Edinburgh and said they'd done this, they went away and read the poem. I'm hoping that'll happen, because the reason I'm doing this is to show what a beautiful piece of writing this is. So, let's go back in time. The year is 1980, and I'm about to turn 16. Please don't do the maths. Or the math, if there's anyone in who's illiterate. I was shy, spotty, and since junior school I'd spoken to how many girls? None. Precisely no girls. I'd been at a boys' grammar school. There was a girls' school next door. That's where they kept them. And I hadn't mixed with girls since junior school. My friends and I used to be the girl chasers. We used to chase the girls through the playground, which is okay when you're 9. So we chased the girls, and my friends started going in for a kiss, and I didn't go in for a kiss until one day. I was chasing Anne McCluskey, and she stopped running, and I stopped running, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and her friends all looked at me, and then they all started laughing. She hadn't stopped because she wanted me to catch her, and, well, do what? I didn't know what to do with the girl. I'm still a bit sketchy now on some of the details. She'd stopped because she realised I wasn't going to do anything. I couldn't, and she must have seen that in my eyes. And in her eyes there was just this look that said, you've got nothing. So that was the end of that. So nearly 16, and I hadn't really moved on from that. Occasionally one of us would be sent next door into the girls' school with a message from one of the teachers, because this is like an age before email or mobile phones, if you did history at school. But I got picked for this quite often, and I remember thinking, hey, this is all right, being teacher's pet's okay, get to see the girls. What I realise now is I think they were probably sending me rather than one of the good-looking boys, because I wasn't going to be setting any hormones racing as I walked past the classroom. You know, my teachers weren't stupid. It's like, oh, those adolescent girls, it's like a powder keg in there. Better send one of the spotty ones. Williams, stop crying and take this to Miss Jenkins. So that was the 16-year-old me that first encountered J. Alfred Prufrock. I already liked literature. I'd had a moment reading Macbeth for homework when I thought, oh, I get this, I understand it. And when Mr. Evans read this poem to the class, I had it again. It's like a comforting, relieved feeling that I understood something. Because that was good, because it pushed out the other feeling, the maths feeling, where I didn't understand. And I just spent the whole lesson in a cold terror of that question that would humiliate me in front of the class. Because everyone else understood, of course they did. Just me that didn't get it. But when I read this poem, I got it. And more than that, it was speaking to me. And I was taken into its world. Great art can do that. It takes you somewhere else. You can shut out the noise of what's around you and lose yourself in a novel or a piece of music or a poem. And of course, the more dissatisfied you are with your real life, the more you want to escape into music or books. So when Prufrock says, let us go then, you and I, through those streets to make that visit, I was there with him. J. Alfred Prufrock, this shy, mysterious, sensitive man. What am I saying? I was there with him. I was him. This was about me. I was 16. Everything's about you when you're 16, isn't it? It's like an innocent arrogance. You see something, you read something, and you think, that's about me. They're writing about me. Some of that graffiti was horrible. And that was only the teachers. Because I'm a comedian, I have to resist this urge to undercut everything with a bad joke. It's like, this is a serious show. It's about me and this poem. In that order, because I'm 16. Prufrock is a man who can't communicate, can't express himself. He sits and watches the world passing him by. Women he'll never talk to. Social circles he'll never move in. He feels completely ignored and unloved. And what 16-year-old doesn't feel like that at some point? In the room, the women come and go. Talking of Michelangelo. See, already he's been ignored by women. I could relate to that. You know, every lunchtime between the schools, girls coming and going everywhere. They weren't talking about me. Certainly weren't talking to me. Obviously, women in Prufrock's world, rather sophisticated. They're talking about classical art, not about Kelly getting kissed on the back staircase, as it were. Different show. Literature tackles the big questions in life. And for most 16-year-olds, the big one, the overwhelming question is, how do I talk to girls or boys? Eliot was only 22 when he started writing this poem, so he's barely out of his teens himself. It's like a literary version of a teenage boy just stopping, like, oh, why can't I talk to girls? Might as well not be here. I don't know if Eliot walked like this. No footage survives. But when I first read this poem, this is how I pictured Prufrock and the man who created him, as an older, buttoned-up Edwardian gentleman. There's an oldness about the poem. It's an old man's name, J. Alfred Prufrock. Sounds like someone in a Victorian novel. So I'm going to see Mr. Prufrock for some advice on a will. I was amazed it was written by such a young man, because your 20s should be the springtime of your life, but the atmosphere in this whole poem is autumnal. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. Remember, the evening was like a patient under anaesthetic. Things are falling asleep, not blossoming into life. I love autumn. That's my favourite time of the year. That first chill in the air makes me want to hunker down with someone. Not just someone, the one. And listen to the rain on the window, the wind outside, wood smoke in the air. When I was growing up, there was a fair every October, so I always associate autumn with those sounds drifting across town. It's like a kind of pleasing melancholy that fills the whole poem. It's a melancholy you could wrap yourself in. A melancholy you could wrap yourself in. Yeah, I'm not going to overanalyze the poem. It's not a lecture if you've wandered into the wrong room. It is a personal. I think, you know, if you study literature, it's the danger. You overanalyze stuff, and the school puts how many people off for life? People never read stuff because of school. E.B. White said of analysing humour, it was like dissecting a frog. Few people are interested, and the frog dies of it. And equally, some of you know the poem. Don't sit there picking apart my reading in the tiniest detail. You know, well, I think you'll find Eliot put a comma there for a reason. You know, so I have had that reaction. It's a personal response. It's just about me, my relationship with this poem. I'm not a literature professor, and I'm not an actor. It's a poem about a man acknowledging his shortcomings. Oh, take it. It's about shyness, loneliness. That's why it appealed to the 16-year-old me. Why does such a young man feel he's trapped in this foggy autumn? But the show is also about my overwhelming question. That's an American high school thing, I think, originally, the yearbook. The boy or girl most likely to achieve whatever. If we'd had that at my school, I wouldn't have been tipped for greatness or anything, really. I was punctual. Not going to see that on a headstone, are you, really? Well, obviously, because by then you're late. But I look back at my life and I think, how did someone so shy and withdrawn as I was as a kid and then as an adult eventually get up on stage in front of people for a living? So I'd like to tell you tonight about the moment when I first decided to do that with my life. I'd really like to, but there wasn't a moment. I don't know if anyone has a moment. Does anyone have a life plan? Or is the plan just something you create afterwards in hindsight to make sense of what's happened to us? You know, what we made happen or what happened to us, whether we're around. We've all got daydreams, fantasies, ambitions. But was there a moment when I changed from someone who doesn't get up on stage, like most people, to someone who does? Because it's never the plan. There was no plan. I was in my 30s, sorry, late 20s, worked in an office. I'd been to a couple of comedy shows in my local theatre, which is where the Daydream took place. I could be quietly humorous with my colleagues at work, but still basically really shy. I read books. I'd written the odd poem. Of course I had. Pretty much a condition of the English degree back then. Students now have to agree to pay back student loans. Back then we didn't. We just had to agree in moments of crisis we'd write shit poetry. And I'd done my best. I'd written some when my father died, and when I was infatuated with a student nurse called Rachel, I sent her a sequence of poems based on Verdi's La Traviata. So yep. So I didn't know what I was going to do with my life back then. Time was passing, but hey, as any cliche writer will tell you, I had my whole life ahead of me. And indeed, there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time. There will be time to prepare a face, to meet the faces that you meet. Surely you do that without thinking about it. To remark on it means it doesn't come naturally. Like, I don't know about you good people, when I have my photo taken, I don't know what to do with my face. And the longer the moment goes on, the more awkward it becomes. Imagine being like that all the time. Having to brace yourself every time you have to face new people. Brace yourself to walk into a room. Little moments of doubt. Little wobble of your confidence. That was me. That's always been me. Faced with new people, new situations. So I avoided them. I hid. I hid in books. I hid in routine. I hid with this man who was just like me. And you think no one else has those moments. You think everyone else is just living their lives, getting on with it. When I went to university, I read an article in the student paper that said for some people, just walking into the Union Bar could be too much. And I remember that's the first time I could remember thinking, other people must have those moments. Moments when you just can't do something. Prufrock must have those moments. Crippling self-consciousness. What face do I want to present to people? How can I face the world? Now, obviously, performing, it's all about presenting a face, isn't it? Clearly, the mask is how it's usually referred to. But back then, I wasn't someone who was going to be getting up on stage in front of people. Can a shy person learn to put on a face to deal with the world? And of course, most of us manage how to, we work out how to. We succeed at some level. The performer takes it one step further, that's all. Bizarrely, I found I could. I changed jobs. And I got a job running training courses, health and safety and various things. And like every other job I've ever done, it wasn't part of a career plan. I was just a bit bored of what I was doing. This came up, applied for it, got it. Never had a career plan, don't know if you have. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Well, enjoying the times I'm not at work. Hopefully earning more money, probably fantasising about one of my colleagues. Occasional nap in the toilets, you know. So you let me know then. But when you mention the training job, It makes sense. It's getting up in front of people. It's sort of public speaking of a sort. It makes sense now, you know. It was certainly good grounding at the time in learning to appear to know what the hell I was talking about, you know. I used to run management training courses. I've never managed anyone in my life, you know. It's like, oh yeah, you need to do this and this. It's in this book, expect it'll work, you know. I used to invent things. I made stuff up all the time. No one ever questioned me. Of course it didn't. I was standing up at the front. I had a flip chart. You know? Move with the times, obviously. I invented stuff that had never happened. Incidents that had never taken place, but they made a good point about safety in the workplace. So I'd say something. Yeah. That's all it was. I would say something like this. I'd say, this school down the road, you all know this school. Some of your children go to that school. Well, 2 years ago, this man didn't do what I'm telling you to do. And he got electrocuted. Think on. It's a good job I've never had kids. Stuff I'd have told them to get them to do what I say. Remember what happened to that little boy who didn't go to bed when his daddy told him to? And that's right, fell into that sawmill. Night, night. I prepared a face that looked like it knew what it was doing. That's why I was good in job interviews. They're a performance, aren't they? It's a mask. It makes you look employable. It's not the real you. It hides all the gaps in your knowledge, the things you don't want people to see. So this split occurred for me. All the doubt and the worry, the insecurity was still there. But dealing with people became all about presenting this mask. And the mask is what people would see when I stood up in front of them. It's lifelike, isn't it? And plausible. But it's still a bit of a leap, isn't it? From the training room to that idea of walking out on stage in front of a packed theatre. But the fact that that was my daydream suggests that somewhere in my head I was starting to think I could maybe do it. Because after all, for most people, the theatre thing wouldn't be a daydream, would it? It'd be an anxiety dream. Glossophobia is the fear of public speaking, not the fear of shiny surfaces. But, you know, there it was. Time was passing. Life was good. I was enjoying that job because I was amazed I was doing something so extrovert. But it was still nice to daydream of a slightly more rock and roll me, you know, selling out a theatre, all that sort of thing. There will be time to murder and create. And time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me. And time yet for 100 indecisions. And for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of toast and tea. Oh, toast and tea. I spend a lot of time on my own in cafes, reading the paper, trying to write, watching the world go by. People watching is a valid pursuit for the artist, isn't it? You know, in the room, the women come and go. Talking of Michelangelo, as I was to discover the world of the stand-up comedian, not quite so genteel. And indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare? Do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. And they will say, but how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. Isn't that beautiful? Do I dare disturb the universe? That feeling of doubt, of smallness, of not being good enough. Who am I to go and try and talk to that woman? Who am I to stand up in front of people and talk about my feelings? Who'd be interested in that? And what's the point of doing anything if in a minute it can become irrelevant? Nothing I do is going to last. Nothing I do will be enough. Nothing I do will change the universe in the slightest. So why do anything? Why bother? It's that old business phrase, analysis paralysis, where you think about stuff to such an extent that you never actually do anything. Murder and create is such a melodramatic way of putting it, but Prufrock isn't doing any of that. He's like me. He's sat in a corner watching everyone else getting on with it. He makes social failure seem really romantic and acceptable. So when I'd first read this poem, I wasn't just some spotty 16-year-old anymore. I wasn't a 20-something office worker who couldn't get a girlfriend. No, I was a poetic outsider. I wasn't ignored, I was undiscovered. Mysterious, smouldering. That's why this became my poem. And yet, I had dared to get up and tell people lies about health and safety. And I wasn't scared. I had the mask on. All the doubts, all the worries about being asked a question I couldn't answer, that was all still there, but they didn't know that. And I wasn't scared the first time I tried comedy, and yet in social situations I was hopeless. And maybe it's because training and performance of any kind are artificial situations. There's a set of rules that make it relatively safe. The worst that can happen now is someone will go, oh, this is boring, and walk out. It's not like trying to talk to someone in a bar. That's terrifying. I couldn't do that now. So when people say, and there's a few comics in the room, we get this all the time, the question you get asked at gigs is, how did you get into comedy? It's the natural question that you get asked. And I've never had a good answer. I've never had a satisfactory answer, even writing and doing this show. I was trying to get more of a social life, and I was amazed I was doing such an extrovert job. This mask was working. And I joined an amateur dramatic group near where I lived, and not to perform, but just to thought I'll meet people, because there'll be quite outgoing people that do that sort of thing. So I wasn't performing, I was doing the sound. And when I say doing the sound, I was pressing pause on and off on a cassette player. Ask your parents. It was, you know, and so I did that. That's fine. And around about the same time, a little comedy club started in the city where I was living, and it was a Whose Line's It Anyway type improv show, which was massive at the time. I was a big fan of that. I really enjoyed it, and I could daydream myself doing that because I thought I could see how it worked. I could see the cheats that I thought I saw. Thought I can do a scene in a Shakespearean style. I've read Shakespeare. I can drop quotes in, because I thought that's what I saw myself doing. So we went to the show, and it was really good. Really enjoyed it. Really friendly atmosphere. Just a little bar, regular audience. And at the end, they said, Sunday afternoons we have a workshop. Anyone interested, just come along, just meet people, have a coffee, have a go if you want. Just watch us rehearse, whatever. So I decided to go. So that's my moment, if I have one. That's when I started to become a performer, and I've still no idea why or how. Nothing before that in my life prepared me for that. I'd always avoided new people, new situations, but once I didn't turn back and descend the stair. I went to that workshop. I played improv games with people I'd never met before. That was such a leap for me. And looking back, I was really fortunate, because it was such a gentle introduction to the world of performing, because the stand-up comedy world now is so massively competitive. It's in recession like everything else. More and more comics, fewer and fewer gigs. There's gong shows, competitions. We're all egos on legs. It's really competitive. They're scrabbling over each other to get work. I doubt I'd have wanted to enter that world. And if I had, I think I'd have turned back pretty damn quickly. But here I was friendly. I felt I was among friends. And I did all right. And they put me in the next show. That's how sort of ad hoc it was. And I did okay. I got a few laughs, just thinking stuff up and saying them. It was wonderful. But that was as far as it went. It was a quirky hobby. It was something to drop into conversation at work. So, yeah, I started doing a bit of comedy, you know, to impress people. It'd be, you know, comedy, like every job I'd ever done, was just something I drifted into. It had been a daydream, wasn't an ambition. It was more an absence of being scared. That's what it was. I could drift on into that world because there wasn't a big sign saying, danger, go back. So there I was in a show, and as I say, got a few laughs, had a nice time. And around about the same time at the Amdram group, I got a part in a production, and it was in the same theatre where my daydream took place, which is such a brilliant symmetry. I'd have had to invent that if it wasn't true for the show. And, yeah. But it was true. But it was an amazing thing, and it was a little studio theatre, but it was packed out because it was a big cast. It was an Amdram thing, friends and family of everyone. And it was wonderful. And just before the curtain went up, you could hear the murmur of the audience. And other people in the cast, it was dawning on them what they were about to do, and some of them were terrified. They just wanted to run away, because it was like, Christ, what are we doing? Whereas I'd never felt so calm in my life. I felt really excited and ready, and I just wanted to get out there. I wanted this, I guess. Now, Prufrock, in the poem, wants to get out there and act, but he means it literally. He wants to get out there and perform, act, talk in his own life, instead of just watching people coming and going, murdering and creating. But he can't. He's frozen, inhibited, shy. Yes, there will be time. We've all got time to do things with our lives, but do we? Can we? Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. The comedy in amateur dramatics shook me out of my shy, bookish ways, but it didn't replace the shy, bookish me. He was still there, but he was behind the mask. He was undercover. I had this quirky hobby. It was fine. But how the hell, years later, did that become my job? We need to fast forward a few years. And I'd started doing stand-up and done it as a hobby, and started to get a few little paid gigs. Still a hobby, but getting a bit of money, including the original Frog and Bucket in Manchester, which was just a little pub at the time. Never thinking further ahead, but usually you become a professional comic when you have a moment, you look at your diary and you think about yourself and you think you've got the ability and the work to give up the day job, hence the phrase. It's a moment of total self-belief. I never had that moment. I backed into being a comedian, really. It was an incredibly dark time in my life. I'd changed jobs and got into an admin role and just couldn't do it. I was overwhelmed. It was not me. I'm not an organised person. I was massively stressed, getting more and more sort of worried, being disciplined for poor performance at work. That's how bad it was. I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning, phoning in sick all the time. And when I was at work, lovely image for you, crying in the toilets. Toilets, of course, that well-known anagram of T.S. Eliot, which, you know, wasn't really a compass at the time. I had to get out because I was crying. Like that. There was a high keening sound from the toilets that day. We'll keep that in. I had to get out. I knew I was making myself ill, and those few gigs gave me an escape route that most people in my position wouldn't have had for whatever, you know, family commitments or whatever. I figured I could scrape the tiniest of livings from those gigs. I'd be broke, totally broke. I'd have to get housing benefit to pay rent or whatever, but I'd be healthier, I'd be happier. I couldn't have gone on the way I was. It wasn't just being fed up at work, which we've all experienced. It felt like a real frightening paralysis, just not being able to breathe properly, panicking, thinking just get through today, and then tomorrow I can make a start on all this work that's piling up. But knowing that every day was making it less and less likely I was going to make a start, that I was going to catch up. And I think I can call it depression now. Looking back, I can give it that name, and it helps to an extent, but at the time it wasn't in my vocabulary. I didn't think of it in those terms. All I just knew was I was feeling more and more unwell, more and more unhappy. And to use a cliched image, I suppose, it was like being in a rudderless boat just going towards a drop. And I don't know how close I was to the drop, but I quit the job and I became a comedian by default. So I got out and I thought, well, what happens to the people that don't get out? And I think this is what weighs the man in the poem down, because I think that's why it's already autumn when it should be springtime. He's trapped in a situation that he knows he needs to get out of and he can't. I got out. I was reading this poem so much at the time because it's all in there. It's almost like a handbook to dealing with it. For I've known them all already. Known them all. Known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I've measured out my life with coffee spoons. Those days when I quit the job, how many days, weeks, months did I lose? Just stuck in a routine, getting up late, walking into town, sitting in the same cafe, reading the paper. It was all I did, and it was all I could do. And my constant companion in his parallel universe just sat in his cafes, wasting his life. I know the voices dying with the dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? Yeah, in another room, everyone's having a brilliant time, getting on with their lives. It's that party we've not been invited to. I think we've all had that feeling. Can I ever go and join in with them? It sounds brilliant. And I never had, and yet from nowhere I'd found the courage. I'd started to get up on stage in front of people, but behind the mask, totally frozen, totally alone. I was amazed. I went to that workshop, which led to a few gigs, which led to a career, which led to this, because for once I had a go at something. I did something instead of thinking about all the reasons why I shouldn't. I acted on impulse, on a whim almost. And I wasn't used to having whims. I'd had plenty of won'ts. But I just thought, I'm going to have a go at that. And to some of you, that might be the most natural thing in the world. You don't have to prepare your face to meet the faces that you meet, not like Prufrock, not like me. And I've known the eyes already, known them all. The eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I'm formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I'm pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? Yeah, Anne McCluskey in the school playground. Fixing me with those eyes that just said, you're not going to kiss me. If anyone knows what it's like to be fixed by pairs of eyes, it's a stand-up comedian. Usually if we get heckled, it's not what you call a formulated phrase, it's just some pissed bloke, but you know, you still have to learn to deal with it. Like, you have to get past the idea that an audience is sat in judgment waiting for you to fail, because they haven't generally. They're paid to see a show, they want you to be funny. But you have to learn that, just like you have to learn that you deserve to be on stage in the first place. Known them all already, known them all. You haven't, you're in your 20s, Morrissey, at Prufrock. It's nothing new, but it's old. How can a young man feel that old? Feel that he's seen all that life's got to offer and none of it's for him. His life's just like spent cigarette ends. I'd managed to get rid of mine. I'd spat them out. I'd somehow got out of that job before it made me really ill. And I don't know, I'll never know how close I came to real sort of darkness and going off the edge. I don't know. I'll never know. But what happens to the people who don't? You know, for whatever reason, as I said, whatever commitments they may have had, they couldn't have taken the way out that I did. That's what it is. It's like just knowing that you have to change. Like the man in the poem, he knows he's got to change, and he's got the words to describe it so beautifully, but not the ability to do anything about it. What torture is that? And how many works of art, how many love songs, how many poems, how many novels have come from that trap? And how many suicides? I've known the arms already. Known them all. Arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight, downed with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl. And should I then presume? How should I begin? Look at her, she's beautiful. She doesn't know I exist. I'm 16 again. I can see her, I can smell the perfume, I can describe her in the tiniest detail, but when I was at university, I had this dream. Nothing really happened. It was a snapshot. And all it was I was in bed holding someone. And the warmth of that embrace stayed with me when I woke up in my narrow little first-year bed. It was before I'd had a girlfriend, so it wasn't based on experience. The word that comes to mind in all this is presume. If you like Prufrock, if you like me, how can you presume to try and change the world, disturb the universe? How can you seek people's attention, their permission, their love? I'd never presumed to become a stand-up comedian because I'd just had to get out of that tailspin I was in at work. I became a comic, as I said, by default, not through some belief in my ability. I'm presuming to do this show now, but it doesn't come naturally. It's constantly like, oh God, are they interested? Is anyone going to come at all? Is it worth doing? I'm not going to talk about me being a stand-up because I'm not a name comedian. That's not necessarily an interesting thing to talk about. I'm not going to talk about the comedy industry. What am I, a spokesman? You know, he's talking about comedy. I've never heard of him. He's not on telly. When I talk like this, how the fuck did I become a performer? You know, and it's really hard to promote a show with this mindset. You know? You want to see me flyering? It's like, would you like to come? No, you're probably right. It's a shocking thing. It's lack of self-confidence. It's a fear. I think what it is, it's a fear of being found out, like it's all been a mistake. Someone's going to tap us on the shoulder one day as a comic and go, sorry mate, it wasn't meant to be you. It was that wacky guy in your office. He was meant to be the comedian, the one with the hilarious ties. You know, now he's funny. Whereas you, come on. Because if I walk through town on the way to a gig, no one would look at me and think, oh, he's going to be getting up on stage. If I meet people for the first time, they're often surprised I'm a comedian, meaning you don't look very funny, which is probably a good thing. When you see someone on stage, what sort of a person do you think is up there? You know, you see someone in a band or playing music or acting or whatever. And I think we all make assumptions based on what people do. I know I do. So footballers, what are they? They're young and a bit thick. Actors are vain and self-important. Comedians, what? Oh, I think you're so brave. Getting up on stage in front of all those people with your act. All right. And the number of men that come up to me after gigs, and I still, the number of blokes that say at the end of a show, oh, women, eh? Women, eh? Beating them off, are you? Yeah, always getting chatted up. Yeah, that's why I'm studying with you, having this conversation for the 1,000th time. Up on stage, though, I presume, all right, the mask goes on. Weekend comedy clubs, not like this. You've got to be bang, bang, punchlines, keep their attention, shooting down hecklers. But afterwards, oh, she's nice. Do I dare? No. And to presume to talk to a woman, What would some shy, sensitive, socially useless man say to her? Wouldn't be something spontaneous, because I'd have been stewing for weeks, probably. I said I didn't speak to any girls when I was 16, and that's not strictly true. There was one. I really liked the girl who worked in my local newsagent one summer, Susan. She was so beautiful and really friendly. We had a lovely chat every time I went in. And I found out she played tennis. I played tennis. She walked her dog up on the school playing fields. I walked our dogs up on the school fields. Aha. A plan began to form. I say a plan, it was weeks of me just going, what if? You know, what if I ask her to go and play tennis or walk the dogs? And she's horrified and tells all her friends and they laugh at me. What if she says yes? Oh, fuck. What do we talk about? Oh, she won't say yes. Oh, she might. No, she won't. Look at her. She's beautiful. Look at you. Spotty chin. Your dad still cuts your hair. What would Prufrock say to a woman? What would he say to someone that would give her an idea of how his mind works, of how he might be worth getting to know? Should he then presume? And how should he begin? Shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows. There's a joke among comedians where we'll say, well, I wouldn't open with that. It's beautiful, those words, but when you fail, and you will, with a punchline like that, a chat-up line like that even, you come up with the most incredible image about how you've got no business being around these beautiful people in their rooms full of music and tea and talk of Michelangelo and summer jobs in the newsagent. I should have been a pair of ragged claws, scuttling across the floors of silent seas. She said no, by the way. Maybe she wasn't into tennis and dog walking or poetic souls. But I did ask her, so I take that as a win. And the afternoon, the evening, sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers, stretched on the floor here beside you and me. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? Even Prufrock's moments of rest are uneasy. The day malingers, hangs around like it shouldn't. Sitting or lying in bed doing nothing is great if you think you've earned it. But this isn't rest, this is lethargy. It's feeling guilty. All that time I lost when I left my day job, knowing I should be getting up and trying to get my life back on track, but no nearer to actually getting up and doing it. So we dream of doing things better, of doing better things. Prufrock dreams, but it's all he does. And he can't even dream himself successful. Imagine for a minute that you did have a go. You got off your arse and had a go at disturbing the universe. But at the key moment, you lose your nerve, your confidence fails you, and it's like you're back in the school playground. And everyone's laughing because Anne McCluskey has stopped running. But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I've seen my head, grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and here is no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I've seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker. And in short, I was afraid. The servant taking his coat laughs at him. Anyone with a sense of entitlement wouldn't notice the footman, but Prufrock, my brother Prufrock's never felt entitled to anything. His default state is, I don't really belong here, I'm not good enough. Maybe the footman sees that in him. Years ago, I got my first overseas comedy gigs, and we got a pass to the first class lounge at Heathrow. And was I thinking, oh, here's to my international comedy career? No, I had a horrible moment, just as I went in, of assuming as soon as I started to help myself to something, someone was going to come over and say, excuse me, mate, no, it's not for you. You're in the wrong place. I was in a 5-star hotel swimming pool watching a plane go over, and all I could think was, is this happening to me? Just a lad from a little northern town on the other side of the world. Someone's paying to me do comedy. And it was happening, and it was brilliant. But I never felt entitled to it. Prufrock dreams a moment of greatness where a servant has to take his coat, but he can't enjoy it. The rug is pulled from under him by the servant laughing. So why try? Why bother? If your moment of greatness only scares you, why go for it? Isn't it better to stay in obscurity Isn't it safer? It's like me. No one knows who I am. I haven't got millions of people seeing me on television, slagging me off on Twitter. Have I settled for that because, like Prufrock, I was afraid? Or have I just found the right level for my abilities? Yeah, probably. A review once said I'd risen without trace. I think some of these laughs are inappropriate. Risen without trace. If you're going to accuse someone of a lack of originality, by all means reach for a cliche. But there was some truth in it, because what it was saying was I could entertain an audience there and then, but it wasn't going to go any further. It wasn't going to get any higher. It wasn't going to become famous. So I could see how that would be described as obscurity, as a review put it, if showbiz is about getting on and being famous. But I never wanted that. I do comedy for a living. It's still unbelievable. It's wonderful. So I'll never know if it's lack of ability or lack of effort that's kept me at the level I'm at. If I'd gone for it 100%, I would know. And maybe that scares me. Because if you don't try, you can't fail. Homer Simpson. It's a fear of being found out, as I say. My eternal footman is someone showing me through at the green room at a big comedy club and just going, you're not good enough to do a show here. Why do we do what we do in life? Is it for ourselves? Is it for the approval of other people? It's got to be both, clearly. You've got to live partly for others, unless you are that pair of ragged claws. But it's got to be for you. Otherwise, if you stand or fall purely on someone's approval, what happens if you don't get it? And would it have been worth it, after all? After the cups, the marmalade, the tea? Would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all. If one, settling a pillow by her head, should say, that's not what I meant at all. That's not it at all. And would it have been worth it after all? Would it have been worthwhile after the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor, and this, and so much more? It's impossible to say just what I mean. But as if a magic lantern threw the nerves in patterns on a screen. Would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl and turning toward the window, should say, it's not it at all. It's not what I meant at all. That's the point. She doesn't want me. If after my best efforts, my attempts at connecting with someone have failed, the words I use are wrong, there's no connection happening. We all want acceptance of some sort, admiration of some sort. It's why we daydream, isn't it? About being rock stars or musicians of other sorts or top sports people or performers. If you live for yourself, fair enough, but if you're living for the approval of others, if your moment of greatness scares you, even just thinking about it, surely you're beaten before you start. So you don't try. You don't go for anything. You stay quietly in obscurity. And you're never going to be a star, are you? Thinking like that. No. I am not Prince Hamlet. Nor was meant to be. I'm an attendant lord. One that will do to swell the progress. Start a scene or two. Advise the prince. No doubt an easy tool. Deferential. Glad to be of use. Politic. Cautious and meticulous. Full of high sentence, but bit obtuse. At times, indeed, almost ridiculous. Almost, at times, a fool. Yeah, Prufrock isn't Hamlet. You imagine him with a skull. You think you've got problems. But in a way, he is Hamlet. He procrastinates. He doesn't resolve to act until it's too late. When he says he's not Hamlet, what he means is he's not the star of the piece. He's not the centre of attention. He's not playing the lead. And me, I know I'm not a star. I'm an attendant comedian. I'm a reliable circuit support act. And that suits me. I think that's the level for my abilities. Not for me, the arena tour or the TV series. I've worked with a lot of the big names on the way up. They passed me on the way up. I remember waving. But I've always dreamed of greatness, and I think at some level we all do. It's a natural thing to do, to think of ourselves as being more impressive. When I was a teenager, of course, like a lot of teenagers, I dreamed of being in a band. So to finish, for the final time, we'll go back in time again to 1980 when I first read this incredible poem. Punk had happened, a new wave. So music had become, in a few years, something that anyone could have a go at, which wasn't the same before, wasn't the story before. Get a guitar, make a noise with it, write songs about girls. Do a gig, there'll be girls there. You're a girl, form a band yourself. Exciting times to be young. Who could fail to get caught up in that? Not me. I leapt into action and bought my first Genesis album. which I listened to very carefully. Alone, on headphones. A lot of my classmates were into punk and new wave. Some of them were in bands, but music to me was still something other people did. I couldn't play guitar. Never tried. Wasn't something I'd do. Junior school, we'd been offered violin lessons, and all I could think at the time was, because I'd managed to duck out of them, at the time I thought, all the kids in the street are going to laugh at me, because I was brought up, working class family in a shipyard town, and all I could think was, I'm going to get picked on for having this violin. What a poncy idea. This was years before Billy Elliot made that sort of thing okay. Of course, now I realise learning violin would have been brilliant, wouldn't it? Girls have gone mad for that as I got older. At university, oh, you play violin? Have you got it with you? Well, yes, I have. More wine. So I dreamed of being in a band. I didn't have spots and bad hair and glasses up there on stage in a famous prog rock band. Punk was supposed to have killed off prog rock, but it didn't. Of course it didn't. Prog is music you can lose yourself in. And that's what I needed as a 16-year-old. But here's the thing. In my fantasy band, I wasn't lead singer. I wasn't even lead guitarist. I was the keyboard player. I was off there at the side with a load of synthesizers. I was Tony Banks. So even in my fantasy, I wasn't centre stage. I wasn't the lead. Prufrock, this shy, sensitive man. Awkward, sensitive man. He came into my life just as my shyness and awkwardness were turning me in on myself, away from that punk ethos of getting out there and having a go and getting off with girls and getting in a band, and inwards towards listening to Genesis alone on headphones. So the poem became something that was just mine, like my Genesis albums. The rest of the kids in the class didn't seem bothered. It was just a poem we had to read. But for me, it made social failure seem somehow noble and poetic. It's why you write a diary, isn't it? It's why you write poems in your bedroom, because no one understands you. You're 16. There was a cute red-headed girl I used to see most days walking home through school, through the park, and I used to walk faster to overtake her. So if she noticed me at all, she'd probably just think I needed the toilet. So it's not a good look. But as I walked past her, in my head I was playing in my band, and she was watching me. Does anyone else do this? I still do this now. I'm walking through town, and I'm imagining people seeing me playing in a band. Not doing comedy, that quite rock and roll thing I actually do, but playing drums in a band. I've moved on to drums. Keyboard career wasn't really going anywhere. At the minute, I've got this big Genesis tribute going on. Recreation, brilliant name. We're doing the Albert Hall in a few weeks. It's going really well. The keyboard player's Kate. She's gorgeous. There's nothing going on. We've all been in different bands, and we've got together to share our love of this music. It's like a super group. I'm losing them. Surely after years as a professional performer, I should be able to see myself in my own head, centre stage, not sat at the back in some fantasy prog rock tribute act, but no. I've travelled the world as a professional comedian, and still in my head, I'm not centre stage. I'm not playing the lead. I'm not Hamlet. But I'm not Prufrock, am I? I'm not totally socially isolated. I've got friends. I've had relationships with actual women. No, really. Surely I should have left this man behind, but no. I think the reason I'll always love this poem and why it's never going to leave me is that despite this on-stage confidence, this face I've prepared to meet the faces that I meet, I'm still that 16-year-old, shy, vulnerable, that first recognised himself in jail for Prufrock. I'm still a closed-in, fairly frightened man that needs to hide in daydreams. I'm 51 years of age. I don't own my own home. I don't have a pension. I can see myself dying alone in a park bench somewhere. Prufrock imagines himself because he sees his real life and he thinks he's ignored and unloved. So he imagines, he lives in his own head. But even in his own head, he's still ignored and unloved. Now what happens when we wake from daydreams? When I come round from my drumming daydream, I've got an okay life. I've got beautiful people in my life and it's wonderful. But what happens when you come round from your daydreams and there's nothing for you in the world? When reality crashes in on your illusions. And the poem ends, as you expect if you don't already know, in failure. It's beautiful, it's poetic, but it is failure. Prufrock wakes to all the reminders that life is not one of romance and success. Somehow, and I still don't know how, I've made something of myself in the real world. I do this, and it's still amazing, but I'm never far from having to retreat. Like him, it is just a mask. I'm never far from having to retreat from the world into daydreams. The comedy I do, I love it, but it's just jokes. I'm just pushing an audience's buttons to give them a good night out. And I'm proud I can do that. There's an art to it, and I'm reasonably good at it, but I've never stopped being alone. I think this is the soundtrack to my life, because every time the world becomes too much, and I still have days when I cannot get out of bed. So I live up here. I grow old. I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I've heard the mermaids singing. Each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. I've seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back, where the wind blows the water, white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by seagulls wreathed with seaweed, red and brown, till human voices wake us. We drown. Thank you.